Good morning to you all from Suffolk in England, where I live. I'm Sue Williamson, and I've worked in and for public libraries in England for 25 years. I've just finished my year as president of CILIP, which stands for the Chartered Institute for Library and Information Professionals. CILIP is the national organisation in the UK for libraries and library staff. My topic today for your conference is Law and Libraries, the UK's legal framework supporting public libraries. To explain this, I will also cover how public libraries in the UK are financed and how other organisations associated with the profession have a profound influence on the operation of public libraries in the UK. I thought I'd start by telling you a little bit about myself and my career in public libraries. My husband's job meant that we moved around a lot in the first 20 years of our marriage, and in the late 1990s, I found myself in the north of Scotland, where a local college offered a certificate for senior library assistants through Edinburgh University. While doing this, I got a job as a relief library assistant for the local library service in Murray, covering for absence of regular staff. When we returned to England, that experience and qualification helped me to get a job in Cambridgeshire libraries in the east of England as a senior library assistant. While working in Cambridgeshire, I followed CILIP's comprehensive career development programme based on evidencing experience in various roles, which ultimately led to my becoming a chartered librarian. At the same time, I did a certificate in management studies because I could see that management qualifications would be very useful in a modern library service. I did several jobs for Cambridgeshire and was lucky that key people who had worked there for a long time chose to retire just as I was gaining the skills and experience to be able to apply for their roles. In my 14 years there, I managed libraries, operational clusters and areas, and finished as operations manager for the entire county, with responsibility for 33 libraries, the mobile library service, 3 libraries in the prison sector, and 10 volunteer library access points. I then went to St Helens, as a town in the northwest of England on Merseyside near Liverpool, as head of library services. And there I was responsible not only for library services, but also for arts and culture and adult and community learning. That job gave me the experience to apply for the role of Director Libraries with Arts Council England, which was my last job before I retired. In 2022, I stood for election as Vice President of CILIP and was successful, becoming Vice President in 2023 and President in 2024. And also in 2022, I was so proud to be created a member of the Order of the British Empire, or MBE, in the late Queen's Jubilee Birthday Honours List for services to public libraries. I received my honour from King Charles at Windsor Castle in February 2023, but I've always felt that this is an honour shared by all who have worked with me and for me over the years. So why libraries? Well, I've been a passionate reader all my life. As a small child, I went to the library every week with my father, and I still go at least once a week to my local library here. And I love libraries because I'm a reader, but public libraries are also vital in supporting their communities in other ways. I was always taught that libraries stood for education, recreation, information and culture. And today, how we engage with those areas is much more varied and diverse because everything is no longer solely available through books, which has brought and continues to bring huge challenges to the public library sector. In my 25 years working for public libraries, my passion for them has remained constant. They are for me my places of comfort, and the people who work in them are a vital part of that feeling. I'm going to warn you now that the legal, financial and operational framework supporting libraries in the UK is a very complicated topic. I'll do my best to explain it, and of course, should you have any questions following this presentation, I'm sure the team can send them to me and I'll do my best to answer them. As you may know, the UK is made up of 4 nations: England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, as shown on this slide. I've marked the borders in blue. And I've also circled London, the capital of England and the primary seat of national government. Scotland, Wales and Ireland currently have devolved parliaments. What does this mean? Devolution is the transfer of powers and funding from national to more local government. It ensures that decisions are made closer to the local people, communities and businesses they affect. This includes decisions about the economy, education, health, justice, rural affairs, housing, environment, equal opportunities, consumer advocacy and advice, transport and taxation. In theory, Parliament in London, which also has representatives from the devolved nations, could overrule decisions made in Stormont, Northern Ireland, Holyrood, the Scottish Parliament, or the Senedd in Wales, if they have national significance. And this is how national government is currently managed in the UK. However, at local level, we also have a system of local councils who are responsible for the direct delivery of local services, which includes the provision of all public library services. Local councils receive an annual financial settlement from the Department of Housing, Local Communities and Local Government, and have discretion as to how these funds are allocated for local services. In Scotland, Wales and England, there is no dedicated funding for public library provision. My working life in libraries has been primarily in England, so I'm going to describe the situation there with reference to the other devolved nations as appropriate. As you can see from the slide, there are 150 local authorities in England alone responsible for public library services, all different sizes and populations. Some are rural and some are urban. In effect, this means that a network which exists under a headline banner of public libraries is managed by 150 different chief executives with different budgets, different aims and objectives, and different priorities. Nobody currently holds them collectively to account on service delivery, programming, or outcomes. In terms of defining what a national library service could and should deliver, there is no strategic plan. Public library services are also in different departments within their local authorities. Examples include, as on the slide, culture, communities, public health, education, leisure, urban regeneration, and buildings and infrastructure. Frankly, it's a chaotic, unstructured mess. While local services for local people are vitally important, as reach into the community is the unique selling point of a public library service, there should also be a focus on national delivery, which underlines the potential of a network which in England alone has 3,000 places available for working within communities. The primary legislation defining how public libraries are governed in England, Northern Ireland and Wales is contained in the 1964 Public Libraries and Museums Act. Within the Act, it states that it's the responsibility of local authorities to provide a comprehensive and efficient public library service. In Scotland, they're covered by the 1887 Public Libraries Consolidation Act. And this sentence is replaced by an adequate public library service, which is even weaker. In England, therefore, national government is responsible for ensuring that each local authority provides that comprehensive and efficient library service. But that responsibility doesn't sit within the funding department of DHCLG. It sits within the libraries team at another department, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, or the DCMS. In Wales, that responsibility sits with the Senedd, and in Scotland, where, as I said earlier, the remit is to provide an adequate public library service with the Scottish Parliament. The DCMS Libraries team and their colleagues in Wales must respond to any complaint from a member of the public that their council is not providing a comprehensive and efficient public library service when one arises, and they must decide if there is a case to answer. In Scotland, any complaint would bypass government and go straight to the law courts, who would make that decision. In Northern Ireland, they brought together all public library services as Libraries Northern Ireland under the 2008 Libraries Northern Ireland Act. But the essence of the 1964 Act underpins that legislation. It too calls for a comprehensive and efficient service, and complaints must be responded to. Another act which indirectly supports the provision of public library services is the 2010 Equality Act, which ensures that no individual is discriminated against and that everyone has access to equal opportunity regardless of their individual circumstances. This is the summary of the aims and objectives of the 1964 Act. An act to place the public library service provided by local authorities in England and Wales under the superintendence of the Secretary of State to make new provision for regulating and improving that service, and for two purposes connected with the matters aforesaid. So the government has two areas of responsibility: regulating and improving the public library service. And regulating is done through superintendents. So let's look at that first. Public library standards were abolished in 2010 at the time of the austerity budget, which was announced in the UK in response to the 2008 global financial crisis. You need to understand that since then, there is no benchmark defining what a comprehensive and efficient or even an adequate service should be. It's open to interpretation by each local authority, and this makes it very difficult for the DCMS to determine if a comprehensive and efficient service is being provided. Since 2010, public libraries have been experiencing year-on-year reductions in core funding as local councils struggle to fund the ever-increasing bill for local services with very little guidance about what provision for a public library service should look like. This has led to reductions in staffing, in opening hours, and in budgets for core services, and even, in some cases, to library closures. It's also meant that data collection has been inconsistent, so public libraries have no evidence to support the work that they do and the impact that they have. It also resulted in a search for more financially efficient methods of service delivery by outsourcing library provision to a range of options such as mutuals, trusts, foundations, and these organisations are commissioned by local authorities to deliver the library service on their behalf. Various authorities across England adopted one of these models, outsourcing provision to an external agency. The advantages are some tax benefits and the ability for the governing body to shape the service and the service personnel exactly as they wish without having to follow council processes and procedures. But the disadvantage is that the contract comes up for renewal on a regular basis, causing organisational uncertainty. It's interesting that after an initial flurry of early adopters in the 2010s, few have opted for this route in the last few years. Another option is to invite the local community to run the library as a volunteer-run service. However, then the public library service is dependent on a regular supply of volunteers. This has also proved very divisive, with many library staff feeling that it diminishes the profession, implying as it does that anybody could run a library and no professionalism is required. It also points to a lack of understanding of the scope of what a public library does and could do. Library standards still remain in Wales. They measure the quality of service and the levels of public engagement with all aspects of service provision. While these are not a legal framework, the Welsh Government can step in if a service is deemed to be failing. So going back to this slide, secondly, the government has a responsibility for improving the library service. Until 2012, they devolved that responsibility to an arm's-length body, or quango, museums, libraries and archives. But then, in a cost-cutting exercise, the government dissolved many of these arm's-length bodies in what became known as the bonfire of the quangos. The devolved responsibility for archives went to the National Archive in Kew, while museums and libraries were allocated to Arts Council England. And in the case of public libraries, that responsibility was allocated with no extra budget, whereas museums came with a large amount of money for development. It also left the Arts Council scratching their heads a bit. Why? Well, the Arts Council is primarily a funding body that funds work and organisations in all areas of arts and culture: music, theatre, dance, art, carnival, literature, and latterly, museums and libraries. They fund organisations in two ways. Firstly, they invite arts organisations across the sector to apply to be part of their national portfolio, and those that are successful receive guaranteed regular funding for a period of 4 years. Secondly, they administer a fund in partnership with the National Lottery, a grant programme to support project work and specific programmes. Organisations can apply as and when they have a specific project in mind. The funding that they provide enables arts organisations to exist. It can be used for anything: staff, buildings, activity, both primary and promotional, anything at all that enables them to function. However, if you remember, for public libraries, that responsibility for staff, core business, such as books, computers, e-provision, magazines and periodicals, and for buildings is the responsibility financially of the local authority. The Arts Council can't fund any of that, so their funding had to be targeted for developmental activity and for events and activities in libraries specifically supporting arts and culture. The problem is that for public library services, their resources in staffing, time available and capability to deliver activity have been severely compromised because of cuts to funding. This meant that many public library services chose not to engage with the Arts Council. From their perspective, they were being asked to apply for money that wouldn't help them deliver core service through a process that was difficult and challenging and likely to be unsuccessful, which would take up staff time and energy and require them to do extra work. Not a very attractive proposition. So what did the Arts Council do to improve that situation? Firstly, they appointed a director for libraries and allocated them an annual budget for service development. And secondly, they ring-fenced a considerable sum of money for libraries to encourage arts and culture activity in public libraries. However, disappointingly, still relatively few library services made applications to them. Those that did and were successful built a good relationship with them, and St Helens was one of those library services. This relationship was started by my predecessor in St Helens and continued by me. But remember, we had the advantage of being responsible for arts and culture for the local authority as well as library services, and that's not common amongst directors for libraries. In 2017, they invited public libraries to apply to become national portfolio organisations for funding starting in 2018. In this first round, 6 public library services were successful, and St Helens was in that pioneer round. They also introduced a new category of sector support organisation into the portfolio, and the Society of Chief Librarians, SCL, applied successfully to be one of those. In 2018, I joined the Arts Council as the second director for public libraries as the new portfolio began. And in 2020, the Arts Council announced its new strategy, Let's Create, and made these statements for public libraries, affirming their commitment to them, saying that public libraries were central to the delivery of the strategy and promising to increase investment in them over the next 10 years. In 2021, it was time for all arts organisations to apply for the next portfolio round. I was delighted that 17 library services applied successfully to become members, and that SCL were joined by ASCL, the Association of Senior Children's and Educational Librarians, as a further sector support organisation. This effectively tripled the Arts Council's investment in public libraries, and I retired on the day that this was announced. So far, I've mentioned the 2 departments in national government, local government and the Arts Council England. But in 2025, they're not the only influential bodies contributing to public libraries. Firstly, there is CILIP, the Chartered Institute for Library and Information Professionals. As you know, I'm immediate past president of that organisation, and it has both national and international standing. It also has affiliated institutions in CILIP Scotland, CILIP Northern Ireland and CILIP Wales. However, CILIP is not the Chartered Institute for Public Libraries, although a large proportion of their membership come from that sector. CILIP covers all areas of the library sector and all library staff and information and knowledge professionals. CILIP delivers a learning programme and supports professional development for all who work in libraries. And as I said earlier, I benefited from their programme. But I have to say that many who work in public libraries don't see the need for that professional support. Why? Public library staff in the UK don't need to be professional librarians in order to simply work in libraries. Many don't want to build a career. They just want to do a job that they find interesting and varied. As a result, Many don't engage with the professional organisation at all, but until recently, the existential problems that public libraries have been experiencing as a result of reduced funding year on year have occupied a disproportionate amount of CILIP's time and energy. I'm sad to say that now many areas of the profession in the UK, school libraries, academic libraries, and health libraries, are now all experiencing financial difficulty, and CILIP is having to firefight on many fronts. In response this year, CILIP has done a lot of work on how to engage politicians at all levels and make the case for the work that all libraries do and the benefits they bring to their communities and society as a whole. I think this is very exciting and could deliver a step change in how public libraries are perceived. CILIP drives thinking and practice in all library sectors, and as such, when I was Director of Libraries at the Arts Council, I funded several programmes that they ran that were of benefit to public libraries from my development budget. This included the Green Libraries programme, which has now expanded to include the richness of academic libraries and health libraries, as well as the National Libraries of England and Scotland. I also supported a programme of international work to expand connections, deepen understanding and build global relationships. CILIP are also very vocal in the response to growing concerns internationally around censorship in public libraries, something that all of us need to be conscious of. And in 2024, they funded a piece of work to support library leaders with strategic planning based on futures literacy, which encourages them to identify future possible scenarios in the profession and plan accordingly. CILIP is also one of the partners on the two key pieces of work that should come to fruition this year, namely accreditation, a model to replace library standards, and data capture and interpretation. In 2023, to celebrate 125 years of their chartered status, CILIP asked for nominations for 125 future leaders in the profession. These young, enthusiastic members of library staff across the sector have given me hope for the future, as they are so passionate about the role that all libraries play in their communities. Secondly, the Society of Chief Librarians, or SCL, which is now called Libraries Connected, and I'll explain that a bit later. This is essentially the member network for public library service leaders. It used to be a voluntary organisation which survived on the membership subscriptions of heads of service. This changed in 2018 when they became a sector support organisation for the Arts Council portfolio. This enabled them to move from being a volunteer-led organisation to having paid staff to manage a programme of support activity for public library services, and this was a game changer for them in terms of building influence. SCL are organised as regional networks of a national body. Over previous years, they'd worked on areas such as a refresh of the library bylaws that govern conduct in our public libraries, delivered a national Shakespeare festival, and perhaps their most important piece of work had been to develop 6 universal offers that defined areas of work that all public libraries were involved in. The initial offers were reading, information, digital, health, learning and culture. And on becoming members of the portfolio, SCL wasted no time in appointing staff and refreshing that offer. They changed their name to Libraries Connected and updated the universal offers, so 6 reduced to 4, as on this slide. The offer of learning went into the underpinning mission statement on the left-hand side, and the 4 new universal offers were reading, information and digital, culture and creativity, and health and well-being. Library leaders use the Universal Library Office to explain the power of libraries to local decision makers, to plan events and activity, to identify local partnerships and set the strategic direction of their service. Each Universal Library offer is overseen by a working group with a national chair, usually a head of service, supported by representatives from each regional network. Together, they drive excellence and innovation within their Universal Library offer, and this might be by seeking funding, leading projects, or gathering evidence. Each offer is underpinned by the Vision and Print Impaired People's Promise, supporting people who are blind or partially sighted, and the Children's Promise, which ensures that all library services include an offer for children and young people. As Director of Libraries, I was able to secure permission for public libraries to apply for professional grants, for project grants funding for these offers, as they are not seen as core business and funded by the local authority. And that led to a lot more applications to the Arts Council for public libraries. Libraries Connected also developed a suite of staff training resources, have contributed to projects such as the accreditation and data development projects, and were invaluable in supporting the construction of the continued service offer during COVID-19, working closely with government and heads of library services to ensure that all changes to policy around the pandemic were adopted as soon as they were decided, providing a fantastic example of a structured response to a major national crisis. Libraries Connected are very influential within the sector and have picked up the baton of sector support agency very well. So we have the Arts Council, SILIP and Libraries Connected, and the government departments, which are always dependent on funding from the Treasury. Firstly, but there are two other key influential bodies impacting on public libraries. Firstly, the Local Government Association, or LGA. The LGA is the national membership body in England for all local authorities, and they work on behalf of member councils to support, promote and improve local government. The 22 Welsh unitary authorities are in membership via the Welsh Local Government Association. LGA are a politically led cross-party organisation that works on behalf of councils to ensure that local government has a strong, credible voice with national government. They aim to influence and set the political agenda on the issues that matter to councils so that they can deliver local solutions to national problems and are funded appropriately to do so. And finally, our National Library, the British Library. Their current strategy, Knowledge Matters, is strongly focused on enabling as many people as possible to be able to access and benefit from their resources. This has led to several major projects involving public libraries. The first is the Living Knowledge Network, where the British Library chooses a topic for exhibition and public library services who are part of the programme mirror that topic using resources from the BL, as well as any relevant resources they themselves have. Those library services also have access to all the online events and activities produced by the British Library for their members. They've covered 13 major topics to date on a diverse range of subjects such as unforgotten women in history, Black history and poetry. The second is the Network of Business and Intellectual Property Centres, or BIPC. 23 library services across England and Scotland have joined up to this programme, which supports new businesses and entrepreneurs. In the 3 years until 2023, the BIPC network has helped to create over 18,000 new businesses and 6,000 new jobs, adding £168 million to the economy. But perhaps most exciting of all is the statistic that after 3 years, 96% of businesses started through this medium were still trading, and the national average of new businesses doing that is 60%. The British Library are also leading partners in the Green Libraries project and support the international work that SILIP does, as well as hosting an international exchange programme where approximately 25 librarians from all over the world come to the UK for 2 weeks to learn about the British Library, make contact with other delegates and build connections. Funded by the Arts Council, they're leading the work on Library On, a digital platform bringing all library services into your living room via your computer, allowing people to experience the work that libraries do throughout the UK. Ultimately, this should expand to include global activity and global reach. And finally, they administer the Public Lending Right, or PLR, on behalf of government. The PLR scheme enables a published author, illustrator, editor, translator, or audiobook narrator to receive payment as a result of public library book loans. This could be up to £6,600 per year for each individual under the UK PLR scheme. Their influence with public libraries has grown dramatically over the last 8 years, and they're important contributors to the sector. To bring all these voices together, while I was at the Arts Council as director, I started the English Public Libraries Strategic Working Group, known as EPL, to try and raise the profile of public libraries across the country with government and within the Arts Council. The idea was for representatives of all these key organisations to discuss issues facing our public libraries, formulate responses to them and develop a combined strategy that we could present to government for consideration to develop a better overall strategy for public libraries. I aim to ensure that all topics were discussed and differences in response and approach ironed out so that we had a conjoined approach to our responses. I also brought together a few heads of service as a sounding board to ensure that any proposals we made would be acceptable to the wider sector. Two areas that are being worked on through EPL I've already mentioned, the accreditation model and the data strategy. Both are sector-led, but likely to be implemented and administered by the Arts Council as National Development Agency for Public Libraries. So as you can see, it's a very complicated sector indeed. To start to look at what the future might look like, I'm going to briefly describe the governance of public libraries in Northern Ireland. Libraries Northern Ireland has been a single library authority since 2009. It sits within the Department for Communities, specifically under the Director of Culture in Stormont. Libraries Northern Ireland is managed by a Chief Executive, who is a civil servant, and a Head of Library Services. They are accountable to a board which currently has 13 members and a chair. Libraries Northern Ireland consists of 8 regions and 1 mobile library service. And in those 8 regions, there are 98 libraries, 2 central libraries and 96 smaller ones. They use a streamlined library management system and have a corporate management plan, a library strategy and a structured business plan. In short, an excellent business model. But size is key. In England, some library services in larger urban areas have come together to make savings and work together. Examples include Greater Manchester and London libraries. That's something that we could build upon. There's also the potential of further devolution within England, resulting in larger regional authorities led by a mayor. We have these already in some areas, such as Greater Manchester, the Liverpool City region, and the West Midlands. It would be so much easier to work with, say, 12 public library leaders managing an area similar in size to Northern Ireland or Greater Manchester to deliver programmes rather than 150 different heads of service. And those areas would also be likely to include communities of all sizes, both rural and urban, which would make service delivery models easier to plan. I'd also like to see us maximising the potential of all library sectors through partnership with for example, school libraries, health libraries and academic libraries, as there is so much crossover in the work that all of us are doing at the moment, particularly around artificial intelligence and how to manage mis- and disinformation in this digital age. And finally, I'd like to see public library services looking beyond their immediate local area to the aims and objectives of national government and demonstrate how librarians and library staff can support those and be funded to do so. The national is not the enemy of the local. The British Library, with its record of national programming, has shown that it's possible to manage and deliver national initiatives across all 4 nations. And we need to develop that and maximise the potential of a good public library network to deliver, underpinned by accreditation standards and supporting data. That, ladies and gentlemen, is my race through the current governance and financing of libraries in the UK, and a bit about my vision for the future. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share it at your conference this year.